You know Babylon, that great and ancient empire that yada 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 was super cool and stuff? Turns out it went from podunk city-state to greatest empire in the world and back again in like 50 years. Welcome to the Bronze Age. Enjoy it while it lasts, because there's not nearly enough information from this era for me to come back this far again. At the time of recording, every video I've made has fit between the end of the Roman Republic and the 70s. Well, Hammurabi's Babylon was about as old to, say, Nero as Nero is to us. We're not even talking about the beginning of history here either. Was as old to Hammurabi as Hammurabi was to Nero. But we're definitely far enough back that thorough biographies from the time period are scarce, to put it lightly. But we got this one. The year is 1792 BC. Maybe, depends who you ask. And mighty Babylon is completely insignificant, being one of many little city-states founded by the Amorites who'd wandered in from the west and were considered nothing more than moseying barbarians. Of course, this was back in the day when anyone more than a couple hundred miles away may as well have had antennae, but still, the Babylonians were nobodies. So when Hammurabi spent the first couple decades of his reign bolstering the city's defenses, and his neighbors asked, "Hey, what you doing over there, Hammurabi?" And he said, "Oh, nothing, don't worry about it." They evidently believed him. But regional powerhouse Elam is sacking cities and trying to take over lower Mesopotamia. Well, they know better than to take on everybody in a fair fight, so they try to get Babylon to square off with the city-state of Larsa. But wouldn't you know it, they both pass their perception checks and decide it's time to teach Elam a lesson. Well, all that military preparation panned out, but Babylon had to do most of the work, which Hammurabi was not too happy about. So what does he do? He marches south on his former allies with the help of some new allies. But then his new allies, well, their cities are thrown into unrest because all their soldiers are down south helping Hammurabi. So Hammurabi looks north and says, "Here, let me help you with that." While his approach was slightly more savvy than, "We're marching east until we hit the sunrise!" The idea was similar. He had all of Mesopotamia bowing down to him in no time. And one advantage to spending time not chasing the edge of the world meant that he got to do some kingly things with his new empire, even if he missed the opportunity to name 20 cities after himself. Instead, he got to deal with floods, amend calendars, manage livestock, and all the wonderful quotidian duties of a king that were probably more important to the average Babylonian than the conquest of distant city-state number 35. And I should probably introduce the elephant in the room and the real reason you know his name, Hammurabi's Code. In all honesty, its significance is mostly lost on me. It's certainly extensive. Everybody knew exactly what to do if they gave their child to a nurse but she let it die by nursing someone else's kid at the same time, or if a surgeon had an unsuccessful surgery, or some kid said, "You're not my real dad." And the answer was bodily mutilation. It also influenced Babylonian law for centuries. Even after the city was sacked by one people group and traded to another, they changed very little of Hammurabi's laws, revering him as a model ruler and in some cases a deity. 1,000 years after his death, people pointed to him as their ancestor to give themselves legitimacy. But it's not the oldest known code of laws. That title belongs to Ur-Nammu and predates Hammurabi by 3 or 4 centuries. Hammurabi took the focus away from, "Oh, Marduk, the pain! That'll be 10 shekels, please," to "Steal from my house, will you? Ha-ha!" And that changed the legal history of the Bronze Age for sure. Heck, that in and of itself was way more significant than his military conquests, because much like Alexander, his whole empire fell apart shortly after his death, so I'm not saying that it's not worth talking about. But looking at it as the cornerstone of all law seems misguided, if not a little problematic. Really, I think the most remarkable thing about Hammurabi is that we have any information about him at all. I mean, do you know how hard it is to find just 5 minutes of information on someone who lived over 3,800 years ago? Which is why I'm cheating and talking about what came after his death, because oh yeah, his whole empire fell apart. Unlike Alexander, it wasn't actually an issue with his issue. He had one son that we know of. I'm sure you've all heard of the famous Samsu-Iluna. He was probably an adult when he came to power, wasn't murdered, didn't have to contend with Hammurabi's generals. Mesopotamia just really didn't like being conquered. Larsa was the first to revolt, then its neighbors said, "Quick, while they're distracted over there, grab the pitchforks!" Until about 24 cities all joined in. Well, Samsu-Iluna wasn't too shabby at sticking pointy things into people himself. He killed kings and tore down the walls of once proud empires to make sure none would stand against the might of Babylon ever again. So a couple years later, all of Sumer rose up in revolt under some new poser, so Samsu-Iluna marches all the way out to meet the threat head-on in a great battle. 2 great battles, which ultimately saw control of Sumer fall to the newly formed dynasty of Sealand, no doubt the direct ancestors of the great principality of Sealand. The other downside to Samsu's approach is that now he had a bunch of cities in his empire that had absolutely no protection, and his neighbors noticed. They just walked in, sacked the place, walked out. Well, if he wasn't rebuilding walls before then, he definitely was afterwards, but still, by the time he died, Babylon's territory was hardly bigger than when Hammurabi first got his hands on it. But hey, the city itself wasn't doing so bad. It still had the funds to build some shiny new ziggurats here and there, so it was fun while it lasted. Plus, I heard they got a pretty cool sequel. Hey, so if you like my stuff, I've got more, but in case you didn't know, this video is part of a large-scale collaboration called the Bronze Bonanza, so if you're craving another Bronze Age bio, Kogito's done a video on Hatshepsut, or if you want to traverse even further back, Stefan Milo's covered the icons of the era, otherwise known as the pyramids. Or if you want a really deep dive, here's the complete playlist. Have fun!